All right, so I have to redo this episode. I had to redo this episode because I did the stupid thing, visual discounting. One of the gravest mistakes the person can make. I had my webcam view and stuff covering, you know, some important information on here. So I'll just redo it and stuff as a second episode. So this covers the matter why people needlessly squabble and try to mess each other up. And there's different ways people try to mess each other up. They steal, they kick each other out of each other's jobs and stuff like that. They beat each other up, threaten each other, waste each other's time and stuff. Um, from here, I'm building, why people make friends, cohabit, and get along and stuff, which is an important lesson because people have to know um, what they should do and why. So, here we go. Basis of understanding. Not every interpersonal circumstance is about codes of reverse action or penal codes. It's about the codes of the culture, how people react in speech, action, etc., depending on whether you have said or done something positive or not in a common method of communication. So basically, once you say or do something, it creates a there's certainly a reaction to it and stuff. If there's no sensible reaction to it, then you know how it's taken is probably understood more virtually or in a more calculated way and stuff, or the person just isn't showing how they feel, but it may still show in how how they sound when they talk, um, and that could be for many reasons, um, largely unrelated to you. So, but it does happen. So, yeah. Um, People have varying boiling points for different reasons. Some people never boil over and stuff. Um, because the thing is, people they want the activity they want the compensation that they want. They want the experience that they want, and they want to realize their dreams and ambitions, or they want to satisfy some need or want and stuff. We don't get to do when they don't get to do that. Their psyche is basically grabbing at air and stuff because what they expected to come to them did not come, and that figurative hand of the mind is trying to grab, and they could just end up hitting themselves in the nuts or wherever, so to speak. It's a nice little analogy. So um, not everyone uses stabilizing pharmaceuticals to manage their behavior and stuff. Some people just don't, for one reason or another. It doesn't work for everybody. Such things are temporarily meant to hold people over until a better cure or treatment is found and stuff. Because chemical dependency is unfortunate can be an unfortunate consequence of that. Um, One of the goals with this lesson series is to help people avoid socially backwards behaviors, um, and encourage positive ones and stuff. Um, by flipping the quote unquote language or interaction of the psyche in an offending mode or in disrespecting mode, a person can dramatically improve how other people respond to their activities and rights for any extent of projectable time. Stuff. You learn how to interact despite the fact that that's another person and stuff in any circumstance. It goes beyond knowing the universal language and stuff or whatever badly educated people think about and stuff. It extends beyond that and stuff. Um, Here, so now let's go into the reasons here. And I apologize for any delay. Personal differences. You know, when people are different, they do things differently. Sometimes they figuratively bump elbows and stuff. Um, they try to do things at the same place and time and stuff. Um, But forensically looking at those differences, you find that this accounts for some of the lead ups to conflict between people. However, if you live in an association where people are generationally very used to being around different cultures and stuff, then it's different. It's different. However, if you grew up in a more insular community or a more homogenous community and stuff, there's gonna be a problem that has to be addressed and stuff because inviting the risk of people potentially being U.S. residents being injured or killed or whatever is not acceptable. It's just a matter of time before the wrong person um, yeah, becomes a victim. So um, interacting with commonalities in others. Oh yeah, this is that's actually has nothing that actually has to do with that actually has to do with the thing I'm trying to build out of this is why people get along. So yeah, so you see I'm flipping the language to kind of create something more positive here. Um, Here we go. Lack of a shared language and stuff. When you don't have a shared dialect and stuff with the people around you, there's like nobody's getting each other and stuff. Um, there's an old kind of parable um, from from a very well-known book about people who all spoke the same language in a large population and they tried to build a huge tower and stuff. They had no well-educated people to know how to make the tower correctly, so the tower fell. You know, you can't like you can't leave it for ants to build everything. You know, um, like for example, even if you try to use ants like taking it more literally and stuff, eventually they just build a mountain that buckles under its own weight. You know, they are an R-selected organism that makes poor use of genetic energy, and they just it, they kind of form like this figurative hive mind and stuff that evolves at a rate of improvement that's impaired by their constant out of control reproduction, which converges to um, a larger organism that just extracts. It's a degenerative organism and stuff. So in terms of the natural philosophy of the earth and stuff, the ants fell way behind. Um, yeah. So expenditure of time and energy is very important and very consequential. Um, so yeah, over separation and stuff. When people are separated from each other for too long, they don't like they just become more and more of a memory in each other's heads and stuff, and you know, then it's kind of left to the workings of the person. Um, Inimical personalities, for example, if you have somebody like Neil Patrick Harris, or some random crazy hobo working in the same team, like huddled in a train car or something, then like what's going to happen over time? The probability of there being a real conflict or issue rises and stuff. Either Neil contracts a very harmful pathogen, um, or the hobo is just offended by Neil being there because the hobo, from the beginning would rather just be alone, or whatever, or the many things. What hobos do is just how do I put it? What hobos do is just it's a bit it just doesn't make any sense to do and stuff. It's indicative of a mind that's not doing well at all, which just raises the probability of there being some pretty crazy stuff going on. Um, we have lack of respect for boundaries. Yeah, yeah. When people don't have their turns to do and to have different activities and stuff, and different places, then yeah, that's going to lead to issues and stuff because you're going to have minds grabbing air for a second. Um, so it's important for not too many people to be huddled under one roof, so to speak. So if you have roommates or people that you live with and you don't need to that you don't actually need to have them live with you because it's not like they're your children or something, then yeah, it's that you're probably best living on your own. Um, or maybe you live with somebody that you're dating and they're not really good. They're not really good for relationships or good with relationships, or they're just very disrespectful or whatever. It's better to just be alone. Um, yeah, so too much time spent together. Yeah, the more time people spend together, the more likely there's going to be a conflict. Um, not letting certain energies express themselves. When the bird doesn't get to fly, it gets sick. When someone who has laid bricks for years suddenly needs to stop, they could contract a transitional illness, liable to the person who took control or influence over the circumstance. Um, they are not necessarily liable if they had no intent to suddenly quit their job in abandonment of contract outside of taking a needed break out of best right. The key to understand here is not that just everyone has rights, but there are grades to rights, and one should not lower someone else's rights to bring up their own. Okay? So if the assumption of a certain right of your own means you have to dispossess somebody of something that already belongs to them, it's their property and stuff, you know, even like then that's wrong and stuff. Even if technically the bank owns what they have and that's something that's collectible and stuff, it does not excuse theft. Okay? Um, so people ought not to be like crabs in a bucket, like in many economically or medically struggling towns where people lack the language or interaction to utilize the resources available and stuff. Um, we still have poor towns in rich states, rich municipalities and stuff because, you know, people that are constantly trying to get over on each other. They want to look at what the other person's doing and then jump in on that, share that with them and stuff. There is too much of that. There's almost always too much of that. People need to be more aware of this behavior. They need to, organize, take turns and stuff, and understand that some days there just won't be time to do stuff because, you just can't. Like there always has to be a minimum level of respect of everybody and stuff. None of this bumping shoulders with people or running into people, stuff like that, or cutting people off on the highway and stuff like that. All that disrespectful, rude stuff. It should not be there. Um, especially when it comes to government vehicles or the subcontractor vehicles and stuff. Do not, under any condition, mess with those vehicles in any way and stuff. From blocking them to tailgating them, whatever disrespectful ideas you get and stuff, do not do it. It's not only wrong, it's illegal. And it's not only illegal, but it's also wrong. Okay? Too much noise or rapid violent movement. Yeah, this is the type of energy that because the way the human brain works is that it's kind of like it's a record and replay system. The brain, that's how the brain and nervous system works. So if you're casting anger into somebody and stuff, the likelihood of them feeling anger or reacting angrily increases and stuff. If if you feed someone nutrients of certain colors, those colors can show up in their body in different ways and stuff. Because again, that's how the human body is. So the body keeps score. So to speak, like the body keeps a record of things. It's determined by the brain and nerves and stuff, and yeah. That's all part of like the brain, and that's all related to the brain and nervous system. So, like, let's say for example, the case with silver consumption and stuff. If human beings, if a person were to eat a certain type of silver supplements and stuff, um, it would turn the skin gray by depositing silver in the skin and stuff. The deposit is a result of the circulation, which is influenced by the activity of the brain and nerves and stuff. Um, so there you go. That's how it's part of that record and replay system. So what it does with the color of different nutrients is that it also does with the color of it also does with information and stuff like that. However, when it comes to the brain and nerves, it doesn't necessarily record things um, in a one-to-one fashion and stuff. This is where critical thinking comes in. So, um, anyway, so this is like in the sense of too much noise, rapid, violent movement. For example, forcing the issue in any sense of the word is poor dull play. But if you get broken to do something, then you don't necessarily see the appointment to get repaired or upgraded. It's almost the same deal in the Mechanicus of Warhammer 40k, and I reference Warhammer 40k a lot. Not only because I am like I've been a fan of it for years and years now and stuff, but because it tells on reality and stuff. It accurately criticizes ecclesiarchy, the military, society, the government and stuff, economics and everything. It's just great. It explains um, the crapification of everything that's happened as a result of human activity. Because the primary enemies and stuff um, largely are the way they are because of human activity and stuff. Um, just thinking later on in more towards year like 39 and 40k in history and stuff. Um, so But however, when it comes to the United States and stuff, there are people who make anti-economical decisions, such as not creating product or giving service. These people are called many profane things because they produce no grounds to be valued above the very small value of being good in themselves. This is where dignity cultures fail. They become cultures of parasitism, like honor cultures become cultures of people more or less thinking everything and everybody belongs to me, which is like adrenal dysregulation or serotonin syndrome, which is, these are diseases of bad personality which lead to, wait for it, people trying to mess each other up and stuff. So you see, this conclusion is inescapable and stuff. Um, Starting from the point of noise or rapid violent movement. Here we go. Venting aggression or angry emotions. Here is just goes back into that same system. Accusing or talking behind people's backs and stuff. Yeah, like if you must say something behind a person's back, make it your best effort to say something good, or don't say anything at all, or say maybe just say something benign and stuff. But just be careful about respecting people's privacy and rights, and not trying to, you know, um, not trying to uh, absorb any accusing energy and stuff or anything like that, or trying to uh, trying to fall prey to preconceptions about that person. Stick to what you know for a fact. And if the matter is very serious and stuff, then the matter is very serious. Um, okay, foul or provocative language, of course. Like this is universal to every culture and stuff. If you throw insults at people, you're gonna get you're gonna you run the risk um, of starting a fight. Dramatism, yeah, the dramatic types, they do cause fights. Insults and torts, there you go. Insults aren't just harmful language and stuff. Insults could be like talking in a barking tone to somebody because for whatever reason and stuff. And throughout your life, you're gonna meet people that just don't know any better. Like you're busy, you're thinking about something, whatever, and they just want to come up to you and harass you and stuff. And while that's not while that's not right and stuff, you have to think about what it means to just insult anybody. That can get a person, that can really find a person in a bad way, um, even years and years down the line. Too little to go around. Yeah, kind of goes to the poverty leads to crime thing. Poverty is just another example of scarcity. You have one bathroom for 2 people, one kitchen sink for 3 people, etc. The 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 more you worsen that ratio and stuff, the more likely there's going to be an issue. Cramped space. Here we go, another scarcity problem. Um, Getting too personally directed or personally conscious, doing things at people's expense. Yeah. So all you people and stuff that aren't paying down your debts and stuff, you better do it and stuff. Don't don't be the borrow until you die people. I'm serious. I'm so serious and stuff. If there's anything that causes problems, it's um it's putting strains on resources like that because our cash supply is the cash supply of the United States is not that high. Okay. Um, Here we go. Being nosy or not minding your own business. Giving one's earnest opinion all the time and stuff. Yeah, I mean, not everything you say is going to give people a good signal, and other people want to talk too. Chemical exposure. Yeah. There's a lot of chemicals that pack disproportionate amount of energy for what they appear like, and um, those can bind to different sites of the nervous system and brain to cause some really wild, crazy behaviors. Yeah, so another example of this is there was a company that dumped forever chemicals in 98% of the water supply of the earth, and it wasn't the first time that was done, unfortunately, and that caused a lot of issues for people. Um, and yeah, they're extremely liable. Everybody who's done that. So, um, oversharing. Yeah, it costs people time and energy to listen to lengthy speeches and stuff, so you'd better say something valuable. Okay, um, that's a good word to the wise there. Um, Painting a target on the head. Yeah, you give somebody a target and stuff. You know, to the brain, it's a target. It's a lot of the time. Talking much, talking much more or much less than others. You know, yeah, you want to talk a little more than others or a little less than others. You want to talk a little dumber than others or a little smarter than others. So you go out of those bounds and stuff, there's going to be issues. Because when people have a sense that somebody around them is different and stuff, they can lose their train of thought, and then their mind's grabbing at air and stuff. It becomes like a violation of trust because people need to trust their experience. That's the thing. This is why respecting people's beliefs and perceptions is so important. However, when it comes to educational programs that are corrective and stuff, it's different. So that's why these lessons can be a bit disabusing and stuff. You know, they're hard to admit at first, but they're true. Um, Intangible abuse and microaggressions. Yeah, those are important. Not respecting the belief of others about themselves. Yeah, which touches on why personally directed statements are not a good idea in persisting social circumstance. Yeah, because, like, if you have to think about this, like, if you have to communicate with people from a logical standpoint and stuff, you don't necessarily have control over your tone of voice, either way, for one reason or another. So, it's very important not to use personally directed statements. So, being forgotten, the trash is forgotten and throw away, even though something might be valuable in it. It's like a proverbial thing. The same goes for people. If you always hide a way to work, politics will just crush you and stuff. Because probably most companies are political institutions. Because even if they're not they don't have a political mission. The individuals there probably have their own political beliefs and stuff. And some people's minds are very fragile. It's just you don't necessarily know enough about that person. It's better not to talk about politics and other emotionally charged subjects. So yeah. So that's another thing you shouldn't do. That's another reason why people squabble. Breaking trust. Yeah. Holding people to the word or too much honor on the table. Too much honor on the table means basically it's like, becomes like reaching too far into a stamping machine. you know, you're just risking more and more of yourself. You lose a fingertip, it's like you're just a bit better off than if you lost your arm and stuff. So when you put more honor on the table to risk, then yeah, you could end up furious stuff because many people simply will not accept that they lose or cannot do something. Eating off of another person's plate. Yeah, that's a figurative statement for, maybe you want to, maybe the person wants to, take that person's spouse or take that person's girlfriend or, use that person's couch to sleep on it for an indefinite amount of time or whatever. Yeah, that makes people want to fight. You could end up in cuffs or in court over stuff like that. Or you could end up with a real, just you end up losing. You spent all that time and energy trying to have interactions with other people, trying to make friends with other people, and now you're not realizing any benefit because you figuratively ate off of that person's plate. Defamations, torts, etc. Hey, we already talked about torts. Denying the dog its bone. Yeah, people need to get after what they're getting after. You can't have people's hands grabbing in air and stuff. So it could be worse if by simply figuratively talking people out of doing things and stuff like that. You can't be like these people walking around with bellies out to here and stuff, always interrupting and talking people out of work and stuff. Like they drag everything. If you have people like that in your association or company, trim the fat and keep what's valuable. Okay. So acting scared. Yeah, many people have a prey drive, just like dogs have a prey drive and stuff. They see fear and stuff. It's like a shark smelling blood. And that's just how some people are. Unfortunately, some people are psychopaths like that, and so they just want to victimize somebody who's weak. Unfortunately, they hate weakness. So standing out too much or too little. Yeah, there you go. And it goes back to to what I was saying about talking too loudly and stuff like that. You want. Intangible abuse and microaggressions. Yeah, we already talked about that. Not respecting the beliefs of others about themselves. You know, yeah. If people associate you with mental turbulence in any way,
they will lash back at you. You won't get their respect, etc. Um, being forgotten. Oh, oh, here we go. Um, Here we go. We'll just go through the rest. Attention craving, not having any friends. Again, it goes back to the prey drive aspect and stuff, you know. That's actually related to the prey drive aspect. Um, getting in people's process and their territory, yeah, that pisses people off. Being known, random roll of the dice, stakes in gaming, yeah. There's a lot of rule systems and laws that forbid gambling for a reason, because it makes people it creates scarcity, which makes people crazy. Being fake, being overconfident in what you can take on, being unhealthy, bad leadership calls, zealotry, conduct disorder, harsh weather. But caffeine abuse, this is probably one of the more common ones I should talk about. Probably one of the more common drivers of aggressive behavior is the high consumption of caffeine, which is a trace chemical originally from coffee fruit, first introduced to the world by extractive institutions. Yeah, the people who were making and selling coffee probably knew they weren't giving you the good cascara. Um, Alcohol is a social lubricant here. So we have alcohol use. Alcohol is a social lubricant, but it also destroys your psyche. It leads to mood swings and can make people say or do overly disrespectful things or just become violent and stuff because of how it's just how it is, you know. And in the addicts and stuff, it can act as a stimulant and stuff, but that chemical dependency is just like it's basically a the chemical dependency is a is you know it's a powder keg to be lit and stuff. And people who and though it doesn't necessarily mean the person's aware of their emotions and they're self-aware and stuff. So or that it doesn't. Um, so even if a person's sober for life, um, then they they still they have to have the wisdom and stuff to understand how alcohol might affect their behavior if they wish if they need to drink for whatever reason and stuff. Unfortunately, part of the recovery process for many people, for economic or financial reasons, or for economic reasons, involves just consuming less alcohol to so their body gets used to having less and less. You know, um, yeah, yeah. Not keeping secrets or talking behind people's back. Yeah, that's another one. Exploding energy into everything. The wages of wilding out is disturbing people out of what they were already intending to do and stuff. And sometimes it's funny. I'll show you a funny example of wilding out. Here we go. Here we go. You see what I mean? This person's that person's character was pretty much killed after that. So that's gonna lead to a lot of issues. So yeah, so when you explode energy into everything or anything and stuff, you better expect some consequences. Um, certain taboos, like attacking an elderly person. Right? Yeah, you know, attack an elderly person, child, teenager. which is still partly a child. Uh, like, um, person marginalized group. High value person. Yeah, stuff like that will get you in trouble and stuff. Um, Stupidity. Yeah, some people just don't see any other perspective on it or see too little, and that really that causes a lot of problems. And I can explain what stupidity does economically and stuff. So going to this economic model and stuff that I made here which is space transposable, time transposable, and also scalable. And so it works at different scales. Well, when it's done, um, basically when you have stupidity, you have a lack of this aspect right here in the chain. You have a lack of this right here in the chain too and stuff. Which means less of this and stuff, which cannot relate to any work done. It can't, because because of less brain activity. And you know, with stupidity, you have less of this right here, the virtual abstract of visual understanding or comprehension of what's going on. And you have less of this and stuff, which means less work. So it's actually degenerate and stuff to be stupid and stuff. Because when you have underintelligent action as part of this chain and stuff, you get underintelligent addressment, which creates raw material waste and a bunch of other issues and stuff. It leads to what's called leads to imprecise actions and stuff. And I'm just going to so oh this arrow looks atrocious. Whoa. Okay, there we go. So imprecise action which leads to worsened circumstance, which leads to possible waste, which modulatably relates to scarcity and stuff. Not everywhere you go is a playpen that catches up everything that you drop and stuff, or figuratively speaking. So intelligence. It's very important to scale it and utilize it correctly and stuff. This is why the implementation of AI in many organizations hasn't yielded the expected results and stuff. It's from the data that I've seen, it's anywhere from like 30 to like 99%, 100% more productivity and stuff. So yeah, sports. That's another source of conflict for people and stuff. They don't necessarily. So the act defeats itself. Immoralism. Unrealistic beliefs about vulnerability. Not understanding the death or jail aspect of life and life's possibilities. Yeah, yeah. Here we go. So if you're in the business, or if your way of being is to create conflicts with people and stuff, you're either gonna end up dead or in jail. I'm sorry. Because is a person necessarily going to calm down once the cuffs are on them? And then what happens next? The person needs to think about that. So excess physical activity, this usually leads to violence or adrenal dysregulations. So that adrenaline burnout and stuff can lead to depression and stuff like that. So you got to be careful. And that's part of a vicious cycle. Financial stress, yeah, that's a scarcity problem. There you go. Try Proof. Try to tell an economist that poverty is unrelated to crime. So the point is proven by having the debater assume otherwise. Having the one who disputes this to assume otherwise. Proof, you know, not letting people have the point of their argument. Yeah. No, when people are making a point to you, hear them and stuff. You know, they give when somebody gives you a premise, let them say their conclusion. Even if saying can be replaced with just addressing it somehow, or if it means they go off somewhere to do something that has nothing to do with you or your life, you know. If that person's not eating off your plate, what are you worried about? So let people have the point of their arguments, or whatever, have their conclusion that they want. So if that person is not eating off your plate, then don't be concerned about, so to speak. So as a figure of speech, you know, then don't be concerned about the conclusion of what they are doing. This will keep you from being attacked when you could otherwise deal with matters in another way. So, you know, sleep deprivation, semblance of scarcity, not letting people have their point in a debate or argument. Yeah, I mean, you know, you want to say that this point isn't true. Well, what about, you know, it happens in debates or arguments too. So there you go. Sleep deprivation, semblance of scarcity, letting one's valuables out and stuff. Yeah, you know, limited resources, out of hand results of circumstance, staring, being too close or constantly being around the same person while ignoring them, throwing slurs and other call-outs around, putting it up a shtick with people, aggressive tee-up sales tactics and stuff. Conflicting expectations, you know, not my personal contribution, but it's accurate and stuff. This actually, I forgot who that came from. It didn't come from me. But yeah, contrived culpability. When people resort to totally imaginary, almost delusional grounds for accusing someone of a malum in, say, crime or just tortful behavior in common, domicile or small claims law domains, then it becomes a subversion of legal proceeding. It becomes something like obstruction of justice, where law enforcement is weakened by nature of the inherence of it. This is an actual offense, and so retaliation is likely to follow. But this is one of the more worrying reasons, because people often know how to use atrocious, chargeably offensive manipulation tactics, so they are learnable. And stuff. But their accusations are in the neighborhood of perjury, and the people who do this are usually faith group harassers, malum in se criminals, etc. They're pretty related. The undesirables of society who exist too large a number for this scarcity constrained economy and stuff. Yeah, unfortunately, that's the reality of it. If you don't like it, it's probably because it's true. So, addiction. You know, poor differential diagnosis or misdiagnosis, yeah, that will cause some craziness. Gonadic dominance, that falls in line with rude personality. Males with gonad dominance are more likely to feel competition with other males, have socially dominant behaviors, and may force the issue, even resort to violence to seek status and stuff. Yeah, stuff. So, you know, if you feel like you need to beat your chest and stand above everybody else to uh, to get something done, you're just headed for trouble. Um, Gossip, having too little to share or having to share at all, personal discrimination, including refusing service at a business, not letting people believe, live, etc., how they feel like, political denials, tying up a person in a politically struggling but otherwise acceptable group of people. Yeah, not literally tying up, but um, just having that person in a point of disadvantage. Betraying social associations. Not respecting territory, being a sitting duck, externalizing, acting out, or impulsive behavior, snobbery, wedging yourself into the lives of other people, destroying your hook. Societies are built on trust. People knowingly place themselves on the hook to do something when they tell someone they will do something. If you simply cut the hook you put yourself on, you can find yourself in hot water and stuff. So yeah, you have to meet your obligations and stuff. Those lines. You borrow money, you pay it back and stuff. And so on. And yeah, there's going to be a minimum loan fee and stuff. Don't think people are dumb and stuff. Like even if you're borrowing just a few dollars from somebody, you should pay back some interest and stuff. So they don't feel like they wasted their time and energy talking to you. Um, and or get a semblance that they waste their time and energy talking to you and stuff. You have to be ready to pay the interest and stuff. Um, there's no such thing as zero interest. I believe right now the federal interest rate is around 8%, something like that and stuff. Go with that. You can go with that. That works too. Um, but if you want to like you're borrowing money from a friend or a family member, and pay them back. You pay them back 25%, 50% and stuff. Why not? Why not? Stuff. That's just um that's just you know that's just good and fair and stuff. They might even deserve that. So depends on how much dollars that 8% really is. So wedging yourself into the lives of other people. People will show you that you are invited and let you feel invited when it is really your time. Otherwise, if you have no sense of inclusion in the time and place, it is better to just go away back to your business or hobby, loved ones, etc. and stuff. Um, yeah, so people need to have a common language, cooperation scheme, language of trust, interaction scheme, and dialect that they speak and stuff. If You should not bounce between the two because it creates a semblance of disloyalty, and then you become the one who gets blamed and stuff. So all that political skill of code switching and stuff, that's actually just a short-term strategy. I wouldn't. Like you gotta be real with people, and be yourself. Um, don't act like something or somebody you're not. Um, so not respecting territory and being a sitting duck. Yeah, externalizing, acting out, um, or impulse behaviors. Some individuals simply cannot help but act out on every idea they get or every word that could come across their mouth. This causes disturbance and over time builds up into conflict. The people society always make a disturbance, eventually realize the result they are trying to get. They're trying to make people react to each other to increase the chance of them squabbling. Yeah. Unfortunately, that's what people who externalize do. And so people who externalize, they often don't have enough dopamine in their brain or something, so they're doing more, forcing the issue more and stuff, and not giving themselves time to think and concentrate and stuff. Like they might try to read a page of a textbook and stuff, or maybe even a simpler book, like this, awkward, the do's and don'ts, the social do's and don'ts of being a young adult and stuff, something like that. And they just don't give them time to think about it and internalize it and stuff, comprehend what it really means. And um, that would be a much better use of time and energy. It's always good to learn. Snobbery, wedging yourself into the lives of other people, destroying your hook, touching people. Touching runs the risk of feeling people out. It gives a semblance of sensual behavior or rude character. You have to be careful where and how you touch people and stuff. It's just how the brain and nervous system are. Just don't do that. Being blameless or nepotized, unaccountable, etc. Being blameless becomes even more vexing when the person does not reach a settlement and make sentimental amends. When someone is offended, it is good to compensate and treat the person. Yeah, making people forget things and on talking them out of it. Hyperkinetics, You know, even if you have your movements controlled, being hyperkinetic, hyperactive, etc., can cause mental turbulence in others by getting on their nerves. So you can make an enemy like that. Um, yeah, it falls under forcing the issue. Buzz killing here. When you create too much peace, you create depression, which leads to anger and anxiety, and blah, 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 everything I wrote here. Emotional abuse, threatening torts. Yeah, and stuff. Not all torts are something you violently do or say. Not all torts are harmful language that you use and stuff, like negative language that you use. You know, some torts are, letting people know that there's a threat and stuff because you want to you want to attack, like you want to be the aggressor and attack a person. There's a big difference between somebody who tries to uh, who tries to threaten or intimidate you, and you tell them like, hey, listen, something like, listen, I'm an extremely dangerous person. Don't try don't don't try to attack me or threaten me and stuff because it may not work out well for you. Something like that. There's a big difference between the two and stuff. Um, if a person Yeah, people lash out if they have a semblance of a credible threat from a tort because like you're putting them like in their lower nervous system where they're not using their higher brain functions. Yeah, they're going to act out. Language processing problems. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, this type of language processing problem also falls under trolling behavior when you're trolling somebody. Um, if you're gonna play with somebody like that, you better let them know you're just playing and stuff, and you just want them to laugh and stuff. Like, as a person who has been telling jokes to people their whole life and stuff, I learned that one. I learned that one. I did learn that one. This is one of the situations where like I I had to learn. It, this is one of the things that refers to something I did or experienced personally. So yeah. Not respecting weakness in others. People who do this make weak people want to react, and then one reaction can lead to another. Yeah, I'm just gonna tap through these. Yeah, right here, this is a situation where men will probably call each other out and stuff to fight and stuff. It's unfortunately, um, these are valuable people we're describing, and that concentration of value means a scarcity of that same type of value somewhere else, and people can fight because of that. They can try to mess each other up, and squabble. Yeah. So when it comes to the austere inequality part and stuff, you can't separate the economics and human behavior aspect from the science and stuff. It has to be based off of the science. If you don't base it off of science, then you have something either based on politics or a bunch of hocus pocus. Um, like it basically becomes grabbing at air. So yeah. men with very high status. Because I wouldn't dare try to blame a specific gender and stuff for all these issues and stuff. So I'm just letting you know that no, men lead to these issues too. I mean, most of the leaders throughout United States history have been men, and we have the circumstance we have now. So they're accountable for up to you know whatever percent of the problems we have now because of them. And yeah, I mean, this basically concludes it all in one episode. Um, in almost an hour. This episode was almost an hour. How about that? Maybe I'll chop it up and make some higher quality lessons from it later. I don't know, but this is the truth. This is why people. This concludes why people try to squabble and mess each other up.